back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn podcast. I am joined today by Leon Kuperman, and he is the co-founder and CTO at HostedPCI, which in itself is really kind of cool. He's also a serial entrepreneur. We'll talk about that. He's formerly the vice president of security products, OCI at Oracle. Leon's professional experience spans across tech companies such as IBM, Truition, HostedPCI. He founded and served as the CTO of Zenedge, an enterprise security company. Protecting large enterprises with the cloud, WAF. We'll ask him to explain what a WAF is shortly after, for those of you that don't know what that is. Leon has 20 years of experience in product management, software design, and development, all the way through to production deployment. He's an authority on cloud computing, web application security, payment card industry, data security standards, which is the PCI DSS more commonly referred to, e-commerce, and web application architecture. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast.
We're going to force on you. You are going to be secure. That would be a much better way to secure the cloud.
There's so many things in your background, right, that we could, when I was putting together the questions and topics for Leon and I to discuss, I'm like, oh, we could do a whole thing on cloud computing. Oh, we could do a whole session on security. Oh, wait, no, product development. No, we could do a whole session on product development. So we're going to try to cover a little bit, I think, of each of those. But first, I want to talk about you and your journey. You've been a serial entrepreneur. You've started companies, been bought out, moved on, started other companies, which is just such a, it's one thing to start a company. It's one thing to start a company that other companies see value in and then do an acquisition of. Talk to us just a little bit about your journey as a serial entrepreneur, the type of companies you've started, what drives you?
Well, I always recommend like having a real conversation for every major project. Have a real conversation about, list out all of your threat. And you should do this in a brainstorming with your team, with security people and engineers in the room, kind of like for every major project and on a quarterly basis. So you get into a room and you say, let's just take an hour and let's list out all of the potential kind of threats and exposures, what could happen. And then you mirror the actual vulnerability or the potential vulnerability or the risk, the threat associated to, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Is it front page news, the major exposure? Is it that we'll breach a whole bunch and expose a whole bunch of PII, including financial or medical information? And that gives you a framework to think about where to apply your most energy. So if the risk is 1%, but the exposure is massive, you're going to basically lose your business. Well, you better still protect that 1%. If the risk is quite high, but the outcome of that risk is almost negligible, well, why are you going to spend all your resources kind of trying to close that gap? Maybe learn to live with that particular risk. And the industry is actually changing in that regard. So you probably heard this buzzword DevSecOps, kind of like this long, soon they'll add DevSec FinOps to the title. But what it basically means is your engineering team should be responsible. And so when I hire engineers, I don't say, you're going to just write the code.
When I talk to all my entrepreneurs and really all the guests, folks ask me, they say, what's the one thing that runs through all the entrepreneurs that you have? And I always say they all have hustle,
really well.
They're never, they're
And
never
the service
happy
team
with
model
where
says,
they
look, when
are.
you
They're
come on
always
board,
improving,
you're
always
going to be
looking for the next thing,
responsible
always
for
innovating.
the design,
And
the
one of the key
implementation,
things
all
that
of the
many of the
testing, and it better be
entrepreneurial
automated
guests
because no
have
one likes to
said
test
is make sure
manually.
that whatever you're
You're going to be
offering,
responsible
to
for the
your point,
pipelines to deploy
solves a
your code.
problem.
And by the way,
Sometimes
if there
people,
are any
develop
severity
a
one
product
issues
and
in
they're like,
production,
I've got a
you're
product, no
taking a
one's
turn on
buying
call,
it.
so you better
What
write your
problem
code
are you
really
solving
well.
with it,
Otherwise,
right?
your whole
Well,
team is
I
going to
don't
be
know.
waking up in the
And
middle of the
they're
night to support
disconnected from
your
the
crappy code.
consumer aspect
So
of
when
it.
you
And
give
so I
a
think you just hit
engineer
right out of the gate.
full
You just hit
responsibility
two
and
key
agency
elements:
over the software they're
hustle
building,
and
including the
solving the
security
problem.
piece, right?
In the
Then
introduction, you
all of a
talked,
sudden they treat the problem
or
as
you
it's
mentioned, or
not
I
a his
mentioned
problem
in your
versus my
introduction,
problem.
a cloud
Well, this is kind of my
WAF.
problem and I better
Talk
have
to
the
us about what a
domain knowledge.
cloud
So
WAF
I think
is.
security is moving from a fringe individual on some abstract team, and we're always going to need kind of that oversight anyway, to becoming a core capability of all engineering teams.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Good to know. Security is top of mind right now. It's in the news.
Yeah, I love
I
your
think those of us in
question.
IT
Like
are
the first
always
principle
aware
question is,
of
if you
security, and
build
very
this, are
rarely,
you going to
does
create
it
differentiation? And if the
escalate
answer
to
is
the
no,
front
don't
pages of
waste your energy. So like
CNN and the
and
Wall
I
Street Journal.
wholheartedly agree with that.
With
Like,
the current
and I'll give you a couple of
situation
examples.
in the
So
world
our
today,
Path AI is a SaaS
especially
platform,
the
our
Russian-Ukrainian
current
situation,
startup.
there's all
Well,
this talk,
so what
right,
do you
about a
need for a
cyber
SaaS? Well, you need a
war
billing
and
module to bill
um,
your customers. Am I going to build that?
and companies need
Probably
to be
not. I
extra
don't want to spend
vigilant
time.
around
I want to spend
security.
time
And
building the things that I'm
um,
really good at that customers need from me. They don't need me
are
to build
things
billing
like
for them.
the WAF
Identity management, like
and other
logging
tools
into the
enough,
console. Like,
given, right,
am
the
I
current
gonna
insurgent
take
of
responsibility and build
insurgency,
a
maybe of
non-differentiated
web
identity access
attacks
management platform? No, I'm not
all
going to
this
do that
hacking,
either.
right? We
Am I
read
going to go build a whole
on the
logging suite
news
that I have,
that
that I just need
the
for
hacker
my
groups
tooling?
were
So
declaring
I'm a
war
big
and they were
believer
going to
of
go attack
adopting
Russia. And there's
things
all
that
this
are already
news,
available,
right, around
especially if they're
people
available
attacking
open
each other in a
source.
cyber
We love
fashion.
open source
How
projects,
do companies
specifically the right
protect
type of
themselves?
license where it's an open license that allows you to modify. And so we internally use a combination of some commercial offerings. Like, for example, we use Auth0 for our identity management software and ChargeBee for our billing software, but we also use a ton of open source internally, and we contribute back to that open source as well. Yeah, like most open source packages are created as kind of a cookie cutter business model. Like, let's take a Mongo or Elasticsearch as example, just as top of head examples. They have a commercial offering. You can go and pay for support, um, and maybe you get some more features, or maybe it's not feature bound, but it's support bound. You can go use that support model all you like. Um, my preference is, if I'm going to use an open source piece of software, I don't usually buy the commercial offering,
Ah,
but we have enough engineering capability to, one, troubleshoot the problems ourselves, but also contribute back to the community. Like, so
yes.
we're a big Kubernetes shop, obviously, and we're continuously contributing back to either drivers or core pieces of that platform. to help drive the adoption of cloud native as we're evangelizing Kubernetes at the same time as using it. So either model works. If you're not comfortable and you don't have a huge engineering shop, go buy the commercial support license on top of open source. There's a flavor for almost every single piece of software out there. But also, if you have the wherewithal to contribute, please do, because that's what keeps the movement going forward.
I love, it's cool to be on the front page. And being in IT, I think those of us in the technology space, right, get asked lots of questions by people that maybe aren't as familiar with, is this real? Is this really happening?
Michael, do you think
Can they
that
really
software
do that?
engineering is a
How can they do
creative
that, right?
endeavor?
Folks that are, their most experience with security products or maybe like installing McAfee years ago on a new PC that they bought, right? And they feel safe and secure because they have a desktop client that's protecting them or perceived to be protecting them. It's really gotten complex. I love what you said about like it's like a job in Russia, right? You're part of this.
I think it's a really creative endeavor, and my wife will disagree with me because it's just a bunch of bits and bytes on a screen. But
I don't know,
just like
and
an
maybe
artist,
we do.
like a
I'm sure we
musician
do,
or
probably on the U.S. side, and the
like a
Western
visual
allies
artist, like
probably
someone
have
who
that
paints or
same
draws, they get into
capability.
flow,
And
state,
I'm
and
trying to think of that movie,
they
right, where
experience
wars
kind of
were
all of that.
fought on big
I get the
screens, right,
same
all based on
when
computer
working on a piece of
simulations, and
code or
we'd evolved
on a piece of
past like
architecture.
actually
And what I hate is being rushed.
attacking
Like, I really
other
want to
humans, which in
enjoy
some
that
way,
flow.
would
And
be
if it's a
better and
time
minimize the loss of
constrained or
human
if it's
life.
pressure bound, then it takes all the fun out of it. So I really try to give like
Yes,
my folks, the creativity of space and time to come up with creative solutions so that they're not,
right. It's
so they get that
it's
dopamine
horrible to
rush of,
watch
yes, I got the thing
what's
done, but I also
happening,
got it
and
done in a
everyone's like, how can we
creative
get
and fun
involved?
way
And
that solved a
when we
very
read the
interesting and hard
anonymous
engineering
article,
problem.
right, nobody knows who anonymous really is, and thus the title anonymous. And they supposedly went in and did some things. It's you would think, right, if it's the same techniques being used over and over again, we would have evolved to a point where we could essentially firewall those things out, right? We could just stop it.
Yeah, and it's a little different for like kind of ERP and larger systems that are kind of maybe more established in requirements. But I really don't like building software if even 10% of it is going to be wasted. That's 10% we could have been ahead somewhere else. So lately, and maybe in the last 7 or 8 years, I've really transitioned to a fail fast and get feedback as quickly as possible motion. So the tricky part with startup life is you have to build something that doesn't exist, right? If you're just building something that's incrementally better for the world, that's just a better mousetrap. So you're in a red ocean of competition almost immediately. And as an entrepreneur, that's a bet. You don't want to open a restaurant because anyone can open a restaurant right beside you. And not to say that like there aren't some
Okay.
amazing restaurants with extremely loyal customers, but it's a very difficult business for that reason. Peter Thiel described it well in his book Zero to One. Like PayPal was a really interesting innovation because prior to that, no one had ever paid. Like you could never pay people directly without an intermediary, and it's literally the thing that made eBay fly. So we're looking for that type of zero to one innovation when you're looking for the thing that will change the market or that will influence the entire industry. So that's the trick. You don't know because if you ask the customer initially, they're going to ask for a better mousetrap. They don't know that they in our current platform, we have this. Sometimes customers are looking for the solution already. Sometimes the customer blows us off because they say,
right.
well, we don't have a problem with it. But then if we're able to
It's
get in
so
front of them
old
and actually
school,
show them,
right? To
the
call up
comment
and
is,
start a
I
conversation and
literally
become friends with
did not know I
somebody,
need this,
and
and
then be
now I
like,
can't
"Oh,
live
what's your
without it." Right?
password for
That's
this?" And people are like,
the
"Oh, I know this
feedback that we
person now.
get.
Yeah, my password is
So
so and
back
so."
to your question, Michael, how do we
And
develop
then,
product without
in they
wasting
go.
resources, cycles, or
Or
time?
my mom, who's
We kind of
elderly,
adopt
who's
a
going to be
very
85.
like a lean
Every
startup
day she
approach,
gets
which
like five
is
or six
we
calls
talk to
from
customers
people,
early,
that
often,
are,
before we
"Oh,
even
your
write a line
Microsoft
of
account
code.
has been
I
hacked," or,
use
"Oh, this has
Figma,
been
which is,
hacked.
if you
And
guys are
if you just
unfamiliar
give
with
us your
Figma, it's
credentials, we'll fix it for you."
like
Um,
a modern
and those
tool
are the
for
types of
sharing
humans,
mockups to make it
that
interactive.
that do
So
those types
before
of
we
things that are
write a
just,
stitch of
it's just
code,
horrible,
we're
right? Because you're
sharing
preying
Figma
on
user
the most
experiences with our
vulnerable, or you're
customers
preying
and
on
getting their feedback.
people's
And we're interviewing
goodwill
customers that
and
we know
belief
because they're in
in
our stable of
humanity.
customers. And then we're
And
also
to your
going out to the
point, from a
industry and
systematic
recruiting
IT perspective,
feedback
you
from
could be
industries
doing
we'd like to
everything
get
right,
into, but we just
but
don't have
then
any
somebody
connections yet.
goes
And there are services that will
and
help you do
falls
that,
prey,
to do
and
those
now
user
somebody has the
interviews.
keys to the
So
castle.
those user interviews are absolutely critical lifeblood for our requirements gathering and for sharing our ideas as well as hearing feedback to those ideas. And then doing so before we write a line of code. And then the other piece is thinking critically, kind of in what I call this PR FAQs. So it's a Amazon teams do this sometimes. They write a press release for their feature before it's ever built. It's actually the introduction of the feature to
Wow.
the internal teams, but they do it as if they built it, and they announce it with a customer and what a customer would say, and then they have an FAQ that accompanies the press release. That's a piece of first principle thinking that basically says, all right, if we're going to build this tool, what does it mean to the market? What does it mean to customers? What does the customer journey look like? Forget about the implementation details. Let's
Wow.
just talk about the customer journey and how that changes their lives. So I always, always,
That's awesome.
always start with that highest order.
That's awesome.
I don't necessarily write it in that format, but it's
Let's
a
pivot a little bit and
document.
talk
It's a
about cloud
six-page
computing, right?
document
I
that
jokingly always
describes the
say,
customer journey
everyone's
in the
excited about
fullness
the
of time. I
cloud.
don't care about
Everyone's
this
like, the
quarter,
cloud
next
this, the
quarter,
cloud that.
or
I'm
a
like,
year from
hey,
now. I want
newsflash,
to
the cloud is
describe
really
it
just somebody
in
else's
its
computer.
full glory, and that could be
Stop
5,
getting so
7, 10
excited
years from
about
now
the
down the road.
cloud. Moving stuff to the cloud in itself is not transforming anything. It's just taking it from one place and putting it somewhere else. But there's suddenly this rush to the cloud, right? I mean, the cloud's been out there
Yes,
theoretically
that's
for a
great.
decade at
And
least,
by the way, I
and
love the
in
variety of
in
topics that you covered so
popular
far. That was super great questions.
services such
Um,
as what Microsoft
the So
offers,
we made a bet,
Amazon,
and this came from
the
historical
likes,
problems that we've
Oracle.
had.
Now
So
there's this
very
sudden rush,
briefly,
I
like
feel,
at
for people to
Zenedge,
get
we
everything
built
to the cloud,
what I think is a
right?
pretty good product because we got a lot
Any
of customer
idea
traction. We got a lot of
why now?
analysts. We have an acquirer that was really interested in the platform to add it to their bigger cloud story. But one thing we really failed at was cost management. Every single month I'd get the AWS bill because we were all deployed in AWS. And then Yuri, my CEO, who I'm also partners with at Cast, and I would have this tuft around why is the bill so high? And the truth is I didn't know. Like I had zero idea why every large customer we were adding would add unexpected expenses, and the thing just kept growing and growing, like multiple orders of magnitude over the years. And so while I think we did a great job from a product perspective, we failed from a cloud cost and resource management perspective. And then I hit the same problem again, a couple of startups afterwards, and even when I was inside Oracle. And I'm like, all right, I can't be the only CTO in the world who doesn't understand how to deal with cloud costs. And as it turns out, I was right. I'm not the only guy or girl. So uh, uh, we made a couple bets. The first bet we said was, okay, if all cloud adoption is coming and it's inevitable, how are customers going to deploy applications? And we took a bet that those applications would be deployed with containers. So gone are the days where you'd be deploying on bare metal machines or virtual machines, but everything's going to be packaged in a nice Docker-like container. And if that's true, then you need a container orchestration management platform. So the second bet we made was that Kubernetes is pretty much the leader of container orchestration.
I agree.
We don't think a proprietary system is
People
going to
that
win out.
are moving
So
to the
if the world
cloud, a
is going
lot
to
of
adopt
times
this
they
kind of
talk
cloud
about
native
security
strategy,
as one of their
Kubernetes is going
primary
to be it.
reasons.
The third bet
And
we
then I've
made
had
was we don't have
weird
enough engineers in
conversations
the
with
world
customers
to
that
manage these
believe
systems
hosting
manually. And we're
applications and
never going to
servers
have
in
enough
their own
engineers in
data
the world.
center in the
So
basement
if we
is the
take
most
those three
secure way,
assumptions,
because then they
we need
have
a
total
fully
control.
automated and autonomous system that will
Which is
manage
always funny,
Kubernetes
because
with
I'm
very
like, if you
specific
believe
angles.
your basement
The
is
three
more
angles that I
secure than
care
an
about
Amazon
are
data center
cost, because that
or a
was the first
Microsoft
huge
data
problem
center,
area.
you've
The second
obviously never
problem is
toured one. It's
security.
like going to
And the
Fort
third
Knox.
problem is
They're often in
availability and
secluded
disaster
locations,
recovery.
and they're
So out
heavily
of those
fortified
three pillars of our platform, we built the first pillar,
against
which is the
physical
cost angle.
breaches as
And
well
so in a nutshell,
as
when you install
cyber
CAST,
breaches.
it takes over your Kubernetes scaling
Talk to us
problems,
about the
and it adds
security of the cloud.
resources to
Maybe
your
is it
cluster
really more
that are the
secure
cheapest and most valuable for your workloads.
for a place to host
So
your
what do I mean
applications?
by that? There's an open market of computers out there, and they vary in price based on their pricing model. Reserved instances versus on-demand instances versus spot instances. Customers have no way of reasoning about that market because it's too dynamic, it's too fluid, inventory changes too frequently. So we're a clearinghouse for all of that data. And when a customer needs to scale their clusters, we just go pick the best computers for the job, including disk and network and all of the accessories. That ends up saving customers at a minimum 30%. Sometimes it's an astronomical 75% of their cloud bill. So that's our mission in life right now. And then adding the second tier and the third tier pillars to our platform is coming soon. Yeah, so all of the major cloud providers have a Kubernetes managed service flavor. So AWS has something called EKS, Azure has something called AKS, which we just released and announced, and then Google has something called GKE. And then we also support a flavor of Kubernetes called KOPS, which stands for Kubernetes Operations. It's kind of an independent way of hosting Kubernetes without a managed service. And then we will likely add other clouds, Oracle, IBM, through the roadmap. We're so busy right now just trying to deal with customers on these three platforms. It'll probably be a little while before we add a fourth or fifth cloud. But those are the three primary targets right now. And then Red Hat has a flavor of Kubernetes called OpenShift that we'll eventually support as well. And customers that use OpenShift are kind of have a double whammy because they have to pay for the computers and then they have to pay for the OpenShift licenses on top, and both are priced per CPU. So you're kind of getting double hit if you're an OpenShift customer. So we think we can save 2x the funds in those type of implementations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're good.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Michael. So you can go to the site, sign up, no cost, don't have to talk to a human being. There's no salesperson that's going to call you. Well, they might call you, but they'll call you later.
Yeah, sure.
You install this agent. It's a one-line
No
install
problem.
script, and within a few minutes, you get a report that you can download in Excel, PDF, and share with your team that says, "Look, this is your workload as it currently
How about
exists.
now?
These are the recommendations that we think
Okay,
you can
that's weird.
do, and if you do all of these things, these are the savings that you're
So you
going
were
to
going to
achieve."
talk about the Capital
And
One
customers do
breach.
this head spin when they see it, like, is this too good to be true? But the nice part is if you want to go on and turn on like what we call phase two or the optimization phase, you can hit start optimizing, and literally within a couple of hours, your whole, and sometimes less depending on the size of the cluster, the Cast AI will take all the operations for you. So one of the big problems in industry is it's great to get a bunch of recommendations. Who's going to take those? Who has the time to take them? our first principle of our platform is we will take action on your behalf and we will take responsibility for those actions, which means we guarantee the uptime, we guarantee the integrity of our operations, but you also don't have to have a bunch of DevOps people babysitting individual micro decisions because frankly, there's too many of them to make per day if you're going to be optimal.
Mm. It's always a battle, right? When we work with enterprise resource planning software and implementation, the IT folks and the security models, right? They always want to just drive down to what's the minimum security that's necessary to do these tasks. And I always say we got to find a balance, right? We got to find a
Yeah,
balance
and
that allows
Michael,
for
what's
the job
your,
to be done
like
and a
in
little bit of
healthcare,
growth.
what is the
So I'm
adoption of
I'm usually like
containerization
the
for
only
applications?
IT
Are you
guy
guys
that's kind of
further
pushing
along in the curve,
against
or
the
are you still
security
kind of just getting
model
there?
to say let's give them a little room to breathe, right? To explore, to do some stuff. And it's always seems to be in conflict, right? That like let's tighten security so tight versus the folks that want maybe a little more freedom, which introduces risk. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. I love it. That's a great, I think so many times, I love what you said about the brainstorming together, because so many times it's like the application group asks for this, the security group
Yeah,
says
and I
this,
think you
the
guys will get
application
there.
group
Like I think,
rebuttals to
as
the
you said,
security group, and they're like,
financial
they just go
industry
back
had
and
a
forth,
lot
and
of
you're like,
pressure from
why don't the two of you
fintech
get in the same
startups
room, right?
to
Why don't
force
you
them to innovate.
collaborate and talk
Otherwise, they probably
together? And
wouldn't have.
I
And
think a lot of it
healthcare, it's a little bit more
could be
complicated because of
mitigated
HIPAA.
with what a
But
great approach.
once
Like,
those
let's really
those
just get in a
interesting
room and
security and data
brainstorm and talk
standards
about
and
it,
PII
and then come
standards
up with
are
a solution
more
that
well
works for
understood,
everybody.
there's going to be, I think, free markets will push healthcare into the right direction.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
Thank you, Michael. Great conversation. Look forward to chatting soon.